the war was over. They could tell you which harbors were sufficiently dredged to the point where they could accept giant freighters, giant cargo. We didn't do any of that. So what were we in the war to do? Well, destroy Germany, defeat Nazis. Great. Okay, we do that, then what? Nobody asked the question. We're in the same position now. So you want to save Israel. You want to make Israel great, greater than it's ever been. You want them to be the strategic hegemon. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we destroy Iran. What if that doesn't work? What if Iran resists destruction? Where do you go at that point? What are the branches and sequels? In other words, what are the fallback positions? You're giving us plan A. Plan A is destroy Iran. Underlying assumptions are all false. It fails. Now what? It's depressing, but that's where we are.
It is. Let me show you the latest proposal, at least that we know of. Dropsite News just put this out earlier today. So this is from the Iran foreign minister and presented supposedly the details of Tehran's latest proposal to Washington. Look at these proposals, Doug. There's 7 of them. Out of these 7, would you say are any of them something that Donald could call a perfect deal? Would these be any part of a perfect deal? Iran's right to uranium enrichment and peaceful nuclear activities. I'd say no. What would you say, Doug? Is there any chance?
I'd say what President Trump probably says. Let's call President Netanyahu.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Well, and then that brings us immediately to the second one. End the conflicts across all fronts, including Lebanon. Chances of that, what do you say?
0.
Exactly. Lifting the U.S. naval blockade?
Well, that's something that we could do. And I think that would be welcomed by the whole world because we're the ones that are effectively blocking the Strait of Hormuz from use, not the Iranians. I mean, the Iranians have basically said you pay the fee, the toll, whatever, you get to go through. Okay, and they're charging that because they have to have some means of offsetting the damage that's being done to them during the war. So, I think lifting the U.S. naval blockade is something we could definitely do. But then again, the Israelis would object to that because that creates income and revenue for Iran, which could conceivably be committed to weapons and operations against them. Release of Iranian frozen assets. Well, we shouldn't freeze anybody's assets anywhere, ever. This has destroyed trust all over the world in our financial system. This is why we're going to lose out to BRICS. It's why we're going to lose out to China. We'll lose out to the SWIFT system. Why? Because they are now viewed as more reliable and trustworthy than we are.
Isn't that heartbreaking?
Now, U.S. compensation for war damages, fat chance. How many R's are in fat chance? Removal of all unilateral sanctions and UN Security Council resolutions. Well, we could do that with a wave of the hand. Withdrawal of U.S. forces from areas surrounding Iran. Okay. If we do that, we're surrendering. We can't do that.
And Doug, on that note, I'd like to ask you, here are the U.S. bases at the point of February 28th this year. Are any of them active in any manner that you are aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean we still don't have some people in proximity to them, but for the most part, they are unusable. Let's just put it that way.
And Doug, wasn't the reason why they were there to begin with was for a time in history as this? This is why we had them there. Yeah. Isn't that why we put them there over the course of time?
Sure. That's
all 11 of these. There's 11 of them here that they're noted.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's no question about that. But we haven't been keeping up with current events in warfare. If you looked at what's happening in eastern Ukraine, you would know that none of these places are defensible anymore. You don't have enough air and missile defense batteries. You don't have enough radars. You don't have any redundancy in it. And there was a tendency to dismiss out of hand the competence and capability of the Iranians. Now, having dealt with the Israelis over the years, the Israelis were very definitely sensitive to it, but even they did not appreciate the magnitude of the leap forward in ISR strike that Iran had achieved. And I don't think anybody appreciated the extent to which the Chinese and the Russians would commit their own overhead surveillance assets to the defense of Iran. So, bottom line is, if you go back to your list and you take in mind this fundamentally changed environment for military power, it's insoluble for us. We can't do this. We can't admit or support, this basket of requirements or demands. But at the same time, we can't reverse them. That's the problem. It's not a question of refusing to deal with them. There's nothing we can do about it. So Iran is de facto winning the war, whether we like it or not.
Right.
Now, there's something else, though, and this is very, very important, and your audience needs to understand that. Bases like this are very important to the Department of the War at the moment. And that's because forward presence, the presence of U.S. naval, air, and ground forces far from the United States, has always been part of this notion of forward defense, that the best way to prevent wars is being as far forward as possible and making it impossible for the enemy to rapidly overrun everything. Well, those days have been over for years. This kind of thing, I and others have talked about this repeatedly. If you put something forward within range of all of these missile systems and unmanned systems given overhead surveillance, you're going to lose them. Now, if you lose all of this overseas structure, you also lose all the general officer and flag officer positions in the Navy. Well, guess what? The Department of Defense doesn't want to give anything up. We're about to be thrown out of Germany. Once we get rid of this Chancellor Merz, and eventually the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, takes over, and they have a chancellor, they're going to throw us out of Germany. And by the way, the Koreans are already pushing to throw us out of South Korea. They're being polite about it. That's effectively what they'd like. And the Japanese are not far behind, because instead of being a source of defensive capability, instead of being there to protect these countries, we're now seen as being a magnet for conflict, a catalyst for war, frankly. Because if they're a target because they happen to have U.S. forces on their soil, what's the point of having us on their soil?
And boy, have we been, what's the word I want? We've been exposed, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Exactly.
And what a shame and an embarrassment it is. All this bravado, really.
Well, this is what happens when you overstay your welcome anyway. But right now, it's matched by technological change that has fundamentally shifted the advantage in warfare. The advantage in warfare strategically, and I would argue operationally, is now defensive. And we have built everything that we do on the basis of offensive action.
Offensive.
We had better start thinking about how we're going to defend the continental United States. And we better start thinking about it quickly.
And unfortunately, let me just play you one voice that flies in the face of that, Dan, who wants to just remain a true believer. And this is a former CENTCOM commander, just from this morning.
The president has time on his hands. He controls the narrative, he controls the strike capabilities, and he knows that the policy he set with the blockade has had short-term and long-term effects on the regime and the people of Iran. So he's been very astute in leveraging that time.
I presume you don't know this man, and he's saying it with a straight face. Is it because he's got money flying into his pockets, or is he really a true believer?
Well, it's a combination, no doubt. I mean, he's certainly going to be rewarded financially for pushing the status quo, particularly from the Israel lobby and its agents all over Washington, D.C. They're all wedded to permanent basing overseas. If you go to something like the Atlantic Council, which should be on life support at best at this stage, everyone over there is trying to figure out how you hold this NATO mess together in perpetuity, which is absurd. About the best you can do for the patient that's sitting on the operating table right now is give him a haircut and a shave, because you can't replace the heart, you can't resuscitate the body, but that's where we are. Everyone is clinging to the past. The past is their best hope. No, they're wrong. Coming to terms with the future is difficult. What do we need a large surface fleet to do in this new environment? If your ships are forced hundreds of miles offshore, making it very difficult for you to attack targets ashore, if you can't land forces, if you have to refuel all of your aircraft repeatedly into and out of the combat area, and you're losing the war to air and missile defense, what's the point of aircraft carriers? What's the point of this big fleet? These are tough things. When I was working for the Office of the Secretary of the Navy, people would joke repeatedly, there are only two classes of ships: submarines and targets. Because in every exercise with the surface fleet, the submarines sank everything. Now, don't you think the Chinese and the Russians have capable submarines? Of course they do.
Right.
And it's not going to end there. Pretty soon, people, if they're smart, will build unmanned versions of underwater capability. They don't need to build giant, expensive submarines. Everything is about denying access to us. We're the aggressor. We're the offensive strike force. So what do you do to keep us out? And if you look at China and you look at Iran, and increasingly I would say Russia, they have effectively answered that question. They know how to do it. The war as we've known it in the past is over. And if we keep on insisting that it isn't, we'll eventually face something far worse than we are facing right now with Iran.
Doug, your brief assessment as to what you see in the next few days. Trump gave us a timeline of the few days, Friday, Saturday. You imagine the chances of going back in are very good?
I think that ultimately, after he considers all the possibilities, he's going to settle. I mean, this is based upon what I've seen from Donald Trump, his nature, his personality, his emotional frame of mind. I think he goes back in and decides that we're going to do this one more time. We're going to give it everything we have. And he's probably going to say, I think it'll work. I hope it works. I think it works. This time we'll get the right targets. This time we'll hit them so hard they'll never recover. On and on and on. Now, again, I don't know what President Putin said to him on the phone. And I do not know what President Xi said to him in private. But it's clear that they were very serious. Don't do this. There could be unspecified consequences in the future. I don't know what those consequences could be. But frankly, what I think we're seeing, and this is the most serious consequence of the stupidity that we've witnessed now for 30 years. I think this started after Desert Storm because we were full of ourselves and thought that we could do anything, anywhere, all the time to everybody. We have created conditions for the emergence of alliances against us. It now makes sense for more and more and more people to cooperate against us. And Americans don't understand that because Americans assume that whatever the government does with its armed forces is good. I mean, that's simply the assumption that everybody embraces. When Donald Trump talks about, the Iranians are evil and they've killed thousands of people, nobody bothers to dissect that nonsense.
Right.
They don't work their way through it. And the Israeli-dominated media, the same financial powers that are driving these wars against Russia and Iran are also ultimately influencing and shaping the information and news that people get. Every once in a while, you'll see something come through that you didn't expect that contradicts everything. I think we've seen that now in the New York Times. The CIA decided to release the truth. Gosh, 90% of the capability that was there at the beginning is still there.
Right.
Well, I think that's probably a low estimate. I think they've got more capability now. But having said that, I think there's a growing awareness inside, this is beginning to get dangerous. How much further can we really go? I think people are asking that question, but I'm not sure that's reaching Donald Trump. And again, I go back to him and his personality, and then look at Congress. Well, what is Congress? Is a big lapdog. You just fill up the bowl, fill up the water, and the dog eats and sits there and goes, you know, so much for Congress. And the occasional congressman says, well, I'm not comfortable with this. This is wrong. Okay, thanks. What are you going to do about it? The answer is nothing.
Right. That's as far as it goes.
You don't want to join the group of people like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, who the great Sebastian Gorka says he's now going to investigate for accusations of anti-Semitism. And by definition, that's treason. Great. What a world we live in. What a society.